Welcome back, sewing friends. Today we're going to sew for the littlest ones. If you saw my haul not too long ago, I showed this pattern. It is McCall's 8265, and we're going to do view A, which is the sack with the elastic in the bottom. I really vacillated back and forth between the tie and the elastic. Let me show you the fabric. It is a sort of peachy pink with butterflies and ladybugs and polka dots. Should be super cute. I think I'm going to also make the View E little headband. It's just a little band that wraps around. It's a little twist headband. It's actually a headband that's very simple to make, and you see it in lots of sizes. We can make it for us too if you just size it up a little bit. So we're going to be making View E and View A today. Let's head over to the cutting table and I'll show you how to lay it and cut it out. I'm getting ready to lay this out. If you buy fabric that's folded, you will often see this crease. And I refold so this doesn't end up in the center front or center back of my garment, especially on something that's as narrow as baby clothes. There's no reason to have to live with this, so I'll show you. Okay, I folded over just wide enough to get one pattern piece, and you can see how much I have left. So you could fold over, cut one pattern piece, fold again, cut the next pattern piece, and then out of the remnant, cut your little sleeve and your other pieces. That's one option. If you have about 1 yard, that's how you would do it. You need 60-inch wide fabric probably to get that, even though this is for a baby, because they're just sort of, you have to work with the stretch. This is for knit. Otherwise, I have 2 yards. I ordered it online. This is from JoAnn's. So I could cut all the way down, have them like this, and then I have this big panel over here to get these last few pieces out of, and I'd still have a big chunk to work with to make more products if I wanted to. So those are 2 different ways you can cut this out. I think I am going to just continue to refold as I go. Also pay attention to your design on your fabric. If you have directional fabric, you don't want to be flipping pattern pieces. You'll end up with your horses upside down. All of these pieces, 14, 3, and 4, can all be placed on the fold. You just will put the center front or center back line on the fold, like so, and cut them out that way if that works better for your layout. I've folded again, so you can see this is where I just cut out. I flipped it the opposite direction because it fit nicely, and I'm going to cut the next one. I'm cutting a size small. That's what I'm going to work with. And then I have all of this over here to just get 2 tiny sleeves and 1 each of those pattern pieces. Okay, last cut, my little sleeves. Here's the headband. I need 2 of these, so I've left room to do the second one. I'm just going to move it down, and then once I get both headbands, I'm going to cut my single little neck bands and we'll be ready to sew. We're cut out. I have the little headband and all the parts to make the sack, and the very first thing we're going to do is binding along the neckline. This is nice because it has a little crossover at the shoulder. If you've ever sewn baby clothes or had a baby, this is a very typical style that you'll see on sleep clothes and t-shirts and things like that. It just makes it easy to open up for those big old heads on those little bitty bodies to get them dressed. It also has the big opening at the bottom, so it should be pretty easy to dress and change the baby. That's the goal. Let me talk to you real quick about fabric and sleepwear and infants and toddlers. There is a regulation for sleepwear that is non-flammable. It's a specific type of fabric. It's very hard to find for sewing at home, and usually it's not knit. It'll be sort of a synthetic flannel, and what it is if it catches fire, it does not flame and burn. It just like smolders out, and it's safer for children. When I had children that age, I did find, I believe at JoAnn's, may have been Hancock's because it was still in business back then, they did have sleepwear fabric for infants and toddlers, and it met the regulations. It's pretty hard to find, but it is out there. This pattern requires a knit, so I'm just sewing up a regular knit. This does not meet the standards for sleepwear that are set for infants and toddlers. It's a little different now because we don't have the open flame stoves as much in our homes. Like, it's a lot safer, but the regulations are still out there, and I want you to know about that. If you are going to be sewing for your own littles, that there are fabrics like that. You may even have to look at jobbers, like leftovers from manufacturing, to find some of these fabrics, but they are out there. So we're going to start by taking our little neckbands. The front neckband is longer than the back, so when we take our pattern pieces off, that's how you're going to be able to discern between the two. And we're going to go to the ironing board and press to the back side 1/4 inch to get it ready for us to apply the binding to both necks. So that's what we're going to start. So we're going to unpin and iron. Neckbands. This is step 1, and this is pattern piece 3 and 4, and this step is for all the tops, whether you're doing the sack that ties, the sack with the elastic, or the little t-shirt. This step is the same for all of them. And it's pretty much the same until you get to the hemline. Like, all of those views are going to be sewn the same way till we get to the hemline, for the most part. There's a little difference. Some of the sleeves you can do the little mitten on. I'm not doing that. I like to use my little metal ruler for this because it's easy to press up. I can iron right over it and get my 1/4 inch perfect. So this is what we're going to do. We're just going to press this up all the way across for both of these little pattern pieces. All right, we have 2 little pieces with a little pressed up edge, and we're going to just pin and sew them on to our little bodice. So I'm going to start with the front. All right, we're going to open up our teeny tiny little garment. So we're going to take our neck binding to the wrong side of our shirt, right side binding, wrong side of the bodice. We're going to do this for the front and the back. So it's going to look like this. And we're pinning the side we did not press up. And we're going to stitch this, and I'm sure it's 1/4 inch. Yep, because it's so tiny. All right, once it's pinned on like this, we're just going to straight stitch it on. I know this is knit, but because of how it's made, it's perfectly fine not to zigzag this on, and you don't need to serge it because it's self-enclosed. So we're setting this up right at the 1/4 inch mark. This is how it looks at the sewing machine. Here's my binding underneath. You can see the little folded edge. I'm using my 1/4 inch foot to make it easy to see what I'm doing and keep track of my seam allowance. So from the front it looks like this, and then this folds up. So you can now see how this is going to fold up over and around. Here's how the stitching looks. Now we're going to press it. Press up the seam allowance this direction. And then can you see this will fold over and then fold again that way, and we'll top stitch it down. Okay, so personally, I like to do this step for both of them and then go to the ironing board for both of them and press and pin for both of them. I just think that's more efficient. I put my pattern pieces kind of away as I go, so I'm going to set those aside, and when I go to iron, I'll iron those and put them away. All right, this is the wrong side. So after you attach your binding, it should look like this on the back side. You can see this is where we pressed up. Then we're going to come over and we're going to use our iron to press this seam allowance up like so. Okay, so if you look at the directions, we folded up our bindings. Step 2 has you sewing the front neck binding on. Step 3 has you sewing the back neck binding on. Step 4 has us for both of them. So here we are with step 2 and 3 done. We're going to press up our seam allowance towards the binding, and then this is going to fold over just past that stitching line. We'll pin it on and then we will top stitch. And by doing this, you're folding towards the front and you're top stitching that direction, and you can make it look nice and neat. So let me get this pressed and pinned and I'll show you how it looks. All right, so once pressed into place and pinned, this is the front side and that's the back. And now we're ready. I need to give that a press. Now we're ready to just top stitch right along this edge. For top stitching, I'm going to use the inside of my foot right here, and that's what the fold is going to follow along, and then you can see the needle is going to go right next to that. So I'm going to have a real close edge stitch all the way along, just straight stitching. Cute little neckline. I'm going to do that for both pieces. I'm going to go ahead and press it again because it just looks nicer after stitching. All right, now that we have that done, I'm going to give it a quick little haircut. And we're going to find our front and our back. They are different. The front neckline is deeper. So now we're going to take our front and our back and we're going to overlap them at the sides or at the shoulder seam. Okay, we are up to step 5, using our little circles that are on our pattern pieces. They look like this. You're going to transfer those circles, and they are on the front and the back. We're going to line them on top of each other. So can you see how much of an overlap there is? It's quite a bit of overlap. So when you get that all lined up and pinned on, then we're just going to baste this edge down, both edges, so that it'll be ready for the sleeve. So we're going to go ahead and do step 5. Okay, here comes the lightning. Can you hear that, friends? Yeah?
Mom.
Yeah?
Go look at the sky.
I know, it's creepy out, isn't it? We're now going to just baste in, turn this back on. Okay, we're going to baste in real quick our little shoulders, and the back laps over the front. Okay, let's just tack down this little seam right along the arm side, top part of the armhole here. Right sides together. We're going to match up our side seam, and I don't know why it does this. Like, I would personally, I'm actually thinking about this. They're setting in the sleeve, which is fine, but it's tiny, and to set in a, you're setting a sleeve in an armhole that's, you know, this big. But you can sew it in flat and then do the whole side seam, and it's just so much easier. So depending on your skill level or just how frustrating you find sleeves, and I'm going to also check my seam allowance because it was only 1/4 inch at the neck. Seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch unless otherwise indicated. That's what I needed to know. Surprised, honestly, because that is a lot of seam allowance for babies. I personally think it's easier to do the sleeve the flat method. So what I'm going to do, you can either go ahead and sew the side seam, or you can do the flat method. This is a set-in style sleeve, but we're working with knit. This is how tiny the sleeve is that we will be sewing in. It's really little. It's very precious. And I just think it's so much easier to sew it in flat and then do the side seam. The baby will not care. As far as comfort goes, it's the same. So what I recommend doing is go ahead, instead of doing side seam next, we're going to go ahead and do the sleeve cap gather, sew the sleeve in flat, and then do the side seam starting at the sleeve going all the way down. So one long continuous seam. Personally, I think that is an easier way to sew. It's nice and comfortable to wear, and I just think when you're working with such tiny garments. So we're going to do 2 basting stitches. There are circles. The circles are what we're going to baste between these 2 little circles. So in the sleeve cap, and that's where our gathers are going to go, I did mark my front and my back so that, and they are different. So we're going to do one at the 5/8 inch line and one at the 1/4 inch line. No back stitching. Set your stitch length to around a 4 depending on your machine. And we're going to just paste in some gather lines. You want to leave your tails. You don't want to trim off your thread tails this time because we need those for gathering. And I am stitching right side up on my fabric so that when I'm pulling and I'm looking at the wrong side of the garment, I will be pulling the bobbin thread, and it's usually easier to pull. Here's our little basting lines, front and back. 2 are always better than 1. There's a dot that corresponds. So I'm going to go ahead and pin dot to dot, make sure that I have front to front and back to back. So we're going to pin at the shoulder, and I'm going to come down here to the arm side, or to the bottom of the armhole, pin there. There's no ease in the bottom part of the armhole, almost always. I'm actually going to pin the sleeve. I like to pin the sleeve up to the gathering line, so there's no ease in there, so we can just match everything up and pin it nice and flat. And now you can see how much gather there's going to be. So now that I've done that, there's how much gather there will be. You can see the little loops. So here it is, pinned in. All this is flat up to where the basting line starts. And then you can see this is all the gather. That's what we're going to gather in. So now I can start pulling gently on the sleeve side, underside, these threads. And when we pull those threads, I'm going to hold the threads and gently pull. And you always want to pull the same side, which is why I always set it up so I'm pulling the bobbin or on the wrong side. And now my little gathers start. I'm going to pull both sides, and then we'll even out those gathers to make them nice and neat. So now, with just a few little pulls, the whole sleeve is gathered in. And that's how it looks. I haven't even adjusted any of the gathers yet, but that's how it's going to look. We're going to just, and you can just, takes very little to just move these little gathers around. And now we're ready to sew this in flat. So we're going to start over here on this edge, and we're going to sew the whole sleeve in 5/8 of an inch. If you're serging, you can serge off your excess seam allowance, which would be advisable because this is a little tiny sleeve. We don't want all that extra seam allowance sticking up in that baby's arm. At your sewing machine, sew it in and then trim away some of that excess, trim it down a little bit, and then finish off that seam. You can zigzag it, you can bias bind it, you can just leave it alone because it's knit, and knit as a rule doesn't fray. But we're going to straight stitch this in. I don't always do this, but sometimes if I'm worried about my little gathers moving around, I will machine stitch it in first and then go over to the serger and serge it, which is what I'm going to do today. So we're going to just stitch in our sleeve 5/8 of an inch. Now, if you did your gathering lines right, you should have one that's right at 5/8, so you will actually be kind of stitching over that old gather line. So here we are, stitching away, making sure we don't get any little fold overs or anything right along the 5/8 inch line. Get our threads out And then we will back stitch when we get here to this edge. Okay. So once that's stitched in, here's the sleeve side, here's the garment side, and then you can see our cute little sleeve. Oh, that's super cute. Already sewn in, so now we're ready to do our side seam. And that's, well actually, I'm gonna serge it first. I take it back, let me serge this. And if you aren't serging it, go ahead and just trim it down so you don't have so much seam allowance in there for that little hunkin' head. And let me also remind you, because I just basted that in, which doesn't matter because I'm serging, but if you aren't serging, don't forget to turn your machine back to regular stitch length after doing the basting, or you will be basting that sleeve in instead of sewing it, and it won't be as sturdy. So here's the little sleeve gathers. This is the flat sleeve, so we've sewn it in completely flat, serged next to where we straight stitched. And this sleeve on the other side is sewn in but not serged. So this is how it looks before I serge it. This is the shirt side and the sleeve side. Now that we have our little sleeve sewn in the flat method, we're going to flip this around and match up our side seams. We're pinning all the way from our little tiny wrist, match up your underarm seams to each other, and pin all the way down to the hem, and we're going to sew this in one long seam. If you're on the overlock, you want to lay this, personally, this is my personal preference. Here's the front of my garment. You can see the neckline is lower. The lower neckline is the front, and I like to lay that on top. So I like to lay the front garment on top, and the bottom garment, or the bottom, like the back bodice would be on the bottom of the serger. Sew it 5/8 of an inch. If you're at the sewing machine, sew it with your little teeny tiny zigzag on 5/8 of an inch. I would come back and trim out to a narrower seam allowance, just so you don't have so much in a seam allowance in there against the baby's skin. You can bias bind that edge, you can zigzag that edge, you can leave it raw, because if it's this kind of knit, it's not going to fray, and no, you don't even have to worry about it. So let's get both side seams in. You can serge this little hem edge if you want to, and so that later when you hem, you don't have to do the double fold. I am going to do the double folded hems for both ends because I just think it looks neater, and it's nice against the baby's skin, but there's really serging is just as good. So now we're going to serge these little seams, and we'll have a little dress, a little sack. All that's left after this is hem. This little line here is what helps me know where to line up. Our little garment inside out. Look at that cute little sleepy sack. I'm going to go ahead and flip it around to the right side. All right, let me show you our cute little garment. Isn't that sweet? Okay, so now we're going to, I'm going to give everything a press. It always looks nicer pressed, makes the seams set nice. You just makes everything look a little more polished. And then we're going to go ahead and put in our hems. Now I'm not doing the little mitten hem on the sleeve. I'm doing the regular little sleeve. So the hems, I just ran up the stairs. The hems are pretty straightforward. I'm going to flip this over. We're doing an arrow hem. The little sleeve has 5/8 of an inch hem, so fold up 5/8 of an inch first, and then tuck under the top and top stitch it. I'll show you a picture. And then for the bottom, where the casing for the elastic is, we have 1 1/8 inch. So we're going to turn up the full inch, turn back down about 1/4 inch so that we can get an elastic in there. And they say 3/4 inch elastic. I don't think I have that. I think I have either 1 inch or 1/2 inch. I'll look and see what I've got. I may be, once again, coming close but not quite. So let's head over to the ironing board. You're going to see a lot of this close up over there. And then it'll be done. And then we'll start our little headband piece, view E. Here is the hem ready to go in. This is my side seam. This is the back of the garment. So I'm going to start here at the side seam, and I'm going to sew around and stop. I'm leaving a little hole, so I'm not going to completely finish the circle so I can put an elastic in here. If you're doing the other version, you don't do this at all. You're just going to hem. You're going to do the double fold over hem and finish it off. You'll have that tail on it to make ties, and you'll be doing this hem instead. Here's my eensy weensy sleeve, and I've just done the double fold up, and I'm going to stitch around. It's so tiny it won't fit on the free arm, so when I sew it, it's going to be sewn like this. I'm going to put it under the foot like this and sew around that tiny little circle. All right, here's my little sleeve seam. I've got everything underneath. I'm going to pull out this pin, and I'm sewing it between 1/4 and 3/8. Now you can back stitch, but you don't have to because we're sewing in a circle. And we're just going to carefully go around, adjusting as we go. And we'll get that little sleeve in. Teeny tiny little sleeve hem. So cute. All right, we have both of our little sleeves in, and I have the hem at the bottom sewn in. I'm just going to cut my elastic. Now it has a pattern piece that you measure. You don't have to cut it out, you just need to measure it. Mine was 21.5. Safety pin on one side. And I've left a little hole in the bottom of my hem. So I'm going to fish my elastic into that hole. Start fishing it around. Now the elastic's a lot smaller than the hole, so what I'm going to do is take the other end of my elastic and I pin it down to the seam allowance here, and that keeps me from accidentally pulling it in. Now I can just fish my elastic. You want to keep it flat. You don't want your elastic to flip, fold, or twist. And then we're done with this part. We'll go on to do the little headband, and then I'll lay everything out for you. I'm glad I chose the headband I did. This is a very common headband. You can make one for yourself. They're so cute. It's just kind of confusing to sew the little twisted part, and so we'll make one together, and now you'll know how to make these headbands whenever you want one. Now I know we don't want it super tight because we want it to get easy to get it on and off the baby, but I think the elastic ends up being just a little bigger than the baby's waist. Okay, we're going to take our two ends. We're going to overlap them without twisting elastic. So keeping it flat, overlapped. And we're going to stitch those together. You can straight stitch it, you can zigzag it, you just want it to be secure, so we're going to stitch quite a few times. All right, now that that's done, we'll just pull the elastic in. You can always tighten this up if you don't feel like it's quite tight enough for you. And then we're going to finish by pinning. We're going to smooth out that elastic again, pin down this little opening and stitch that shut. And then this little garment is done. It is not a ton of elastic in there. And you could even put a drawstring in it, though I don't think drawstrings are as safe for babies, personally. The tie, I almost made the tie option, which I think is really cute. So if you want it to completely close at the bottom, keep those little feetsies warm, it's a little more secure, make the tie bottom. So we're now just closing shut that little hole. And we have a finished little garment. Now, could use a little pressing. I'm gonna flip it around, you can see how he looks. So tiny. I don't even have a little ball to put this on to show it to you, but I'll lay it flat and show it to you. There he is. Isn't that sweet? Sweet little sleep sack. All right, let's make the headband. All right, headband. So we really have two headband pieces here. We're going to take one of them. We are on headband E, instruction 1. We're going to take one headband, we're going to fold it right sides together this way, and we're going to sew these ends. There's a circle. We need to mark those circles so we know where to stop sewing. We need to leave that little section open. You start right at the edge. You don't have to worry about leaving a seam allowance at the edge. So just do the back stitch. So we've done that to one of them, and then we are going to flip it around to the right side. Okay, so here's mine. Here's the circle. So I've sewn from here to the edge, so it looks like that. We're now going to flip it around. You can see it's open right here on these little ends. I think just so you can see that that's where it's open. So there's our little tube. Now we're going to take the other one, insert the remaining headband through the small circles, which are these little things up here. Okay, so we'll worry about that in a minute. We're going to slide it through, and we want to be able to see the wrong side. So I'm going to kind of hold it like this. You can even put a safety pin on it if you want to, if it makes it easier for you to pull it through. I think I'm going to do that actually. I'm going to kind of fold it up and make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to stick a safety pin through that end. And now it's much easier for me to get a hold of to pull it through. So I'm pulling that through that little opening. See how much easier that was to pull it through? All right, so now that that's pulled through, we are going to, with right sides together, bring the ends of the headband together. So we're going to take our little headband piece. Now we're going to have one side that's the right side and one side that's the wrong side that we can see. We're going to flip this way. And we, again, we have those circles. So I'm going to put these pins in. We're going to be sewing one side. We're going to sew all the way up to those little circles. So we're going to sew on one side. We're going to sew this whole thing. On the other side, now it's open on the end. On the other side, we're going to sew and leave a little hole and then sew again. And that's for turning through. And then we'll sew these raw ends together. And that's how we get everything right side around to make it pretty. I'm going to hold it up this way. See these pins? We need to leave a little hole. So I'm going to sew from here to that pin, back stitch, and then I'm going to sew from this pin to this pin, back stitching, and this will be open here. This side we're going to sew down from pin to pin. All right, and the bottom, that's the little circle on our pattern. That's what we marked. So now we're going to sew. So I just sewed the one side straight down. Now I'm going to come back and sew this section and this section, leaving this open. Make sure you back stitch every time you start and stop. Give it a haircut. All right, now that was step 2. I'm going to flip it over. Step 3, so we're not working with the hole we left yet. We're just pulling through where our little twist is. Down here at the bottom. Okay. All right. So now we've got that done. Now we want to, before we go much farther, you want to go ahead and tuck around any little raw edges that are showing where our circles were, where that little opening was. So I'm just flipping any of those little areas to the back, making sure I don't have any raw edges showing, because we do have an actual little hole there. Now we're going to, the way they show it is your seams show. So I'm going to actually kind of push open my seams here so I don't end up with. So you can see I'm kind of pushing open my seam allowance like this. It is seam on top of seam. You can see that there. So that's what we're doing. So I'm going to kind of pin that real quick. So I'm going to just put a pin so that all those seams stay where they belong. This is done. I have done this before and we did it differently. Okay, so now I have my 2 seam allowances pressed like so, and then we have the hole that we made. So let's find where our little hole is. This is the side that's sewn completely shut, so one of these is going to be the hole. Here's my hole. And we're going to use that hole to sew these 2 raw ends together. So we're going to actually put the raw ends, we're going to put them together like this to start with, but we're going to come in here to this hole and pull it through so I can actually sew it to the inside and it'll disappear. So we're pinning the insides together like this. So now pinned it together like this. Okay, that's where we're starting. If you look at how they have it shown there, that's what we're going to do. Now, if I pull this through this opening, I'm going to actually, while that's pinned together, I'm going to kind of tuck it in and grab it and pull it through that opening. Now that I've done that, ta-da, now everything's technically on the inside. And they just sew it in a circle way. It's going to be teeny tiny, teeny tiny. Just to keep our seam allowances flat. This is going to be really small. This is the little circle we're sewing around. It's just that big. So it's just going to barely fit under the foot. It's so tiny. So it is pulled through. We've made a circle. It just barely fits. Okay. So you can see how it just about doesn't fit, but it's in. And we're going to just go around the circle and then we will pull it through and sew shut that hole. So we're going to go around our little tiny circle, little teeny tiny circle. Sorry. Dropping the camera because I'm so busy concentrating. Also trying to keep all my seam allowances where they belong. This is pretty fiddly, just so you know. My ring's even hitting. I'm in here working so tight, my ring's bumping up there. Sink the needle, turn, sink the needle, turn. Now, I have sort of a long toe on my foot. If you have a little bit shorter toe, it might be a little easier to get it all underneath. What we don't want is a little fold over. I forgot to sink my needle, so the whole thing came out. There we go. Okay, you can see how tight it is to sew it, but it can be done. All right, I'm all the way around that fiddly little thing. There's our little circle. I'm gonna give it a haircut. Now we can just pull this through There's our little headband. Now where the hole was, I've got to find my hole, it's right here. I'm gonna stitch that shut. You can top stitch it or you can hand stitch it. I'm just gonna top stitch it because it's easy. I'm just going to go lay it out over there so you can see how cute it is. This is not the end of our sewing for babies. I actually have a couple more little projects that I will be doing very soon. Got to get them done before the baby shower. All right, so here's our little headband. Super sweet. And here's our little sleep sack. All right, I'm going to go lay them out flat so you can just see how cute they are. All right, here's our little finished outfit. Isn't it sweet? What a sweet little baby set. Here's our finished little sleep sack. A few little close-ups so you can see the little neckline. There's our little headband, the hem. There's the elastic. If you like this video and you want to see more, please consider subscribing and hit the like button so other sewists can find us too, and we'll grow our community. See you next week for another fun video.